For 14,000 years, humans baked bread. Not once did anyone slice it in a bakery. Not once. Then, in 1928, a broke jeweler from Missouri changed that, and 15 years later, the United States government made it illegal. Bread is older than writing, older than the wheel, older than farming itself. Archaeologists working in Jordan found charred crumbs of flatbread that date back around 14,000 years. The people who baked it were hunter-gatherers. This is before villages, before civilization. Humans figured out how to bake bread before they figured out how to plant crops on purpose. The Egyptians used loaves as currency. The Romans built industrial bakeries that ran around the clock. The Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, all of it came and went. And in every one of those bakeries, in every farmhouse kitchen for thousands of years, bread came out of the oven in one piece. If you wanted a slice, you grabbed a knife. Steam engines got invented. Bread stayed whole. Electricity got invented. Bread stayed whole. Cars, airplanes, radio, all of it. And bread still stayed whole. Why? Because a soft loaf is not a block of wood. Push too hard and you crush it. Push too soft and you tear it. Get the blade angle wrong and you get uneven chunks. Every engineer who tried it failed. And even if you could slice it, sliced bread goes stale. Fast. Within a day, it's dry. Within 2, it's a brick. So bakers refused to do it. Housewives sliced by hand. And the whole world just accepted that this was how bread worked, until one man decided it wasn't. His name was Otto Rohwedder. He wasn't a baker, he wasn't a food scientist, he didn't even work in the food industry, he was a jeweler. And here's what makes his story strange. He spent 15 years and lost everything he owned to build a machine most people had told him nobody wanted. And when he finally succeeded, Americans fell so deeply in love with what he'd built that when the government tried to take it away, the country nearly revolted. That's coming. But first, you need to understand what this man was up against. Because before he built the machine that changed breakfast forever, he had to survive a fire that nearly killed the whole idea. Otto Rohwedder was born in Iowa in July of 1880. He grew up in Davenport, in a German-American family, and from an early age he was obsessed with how things worked. He took apart clocks just to see what was inside. Then he'd put them back together. Then he'd make them run better. By his early 30s, Otto owned 3 jewelry stores in St. Joseph, Missouri. He had a wife, 2 children, and a comfortable, respected life. Most men in that position would have stayed there for the rest of their days. Otto didn't. He spent his evenings tinkering, reading engineering journals, sketching machines in the back of ledgers, and in 1912 an idea took hold of him and wouldn't let go. He wanted to build a machine that could slice bread. In 1912, this was not a normal thing for a jeweler to work on. Bakers weren't asking for it. Housewives weren't demanding it. The market didn't exist. Otto just believed it should exist. So he started asking around. He talked to bakers, he talked to housewives, and what he heard almost killed the project before it began. Bakers told him the same thing, over and over. Nobody wants pre-sliced bread. It'll go stale. It'll fall apart in transit. Customers will complain. You're wasting your time. But Otto kept working. He built his first prototype in his own workshop. It was crude. A hand-cranked frame with a set of blades. It sliced. Sort of. The slices were uneven. The blade would drag. The bread would sometimes tear. He kept refining, kept adjusting, kept experimenting with blade thickness, blade spacing, blade angle. He tested soft loaves, firm loaves, fresh loaves, day-old loaves. By 1916, he had something that worked. Not perfectly, but it worked. He needed money to scale it up. So he made a decision that would haunt him. He sold his jewelry stores, all 3 of them. Every dollar he had, he poured into building a proper factory and a working commercial prototype. He took a night job as a security guard to keep food on his family's table while he built it. His wife was worried. His friends thought he'd lost his mind. A jeweler? Selling everything? To build a bread machine? By early 1917, he was close. So close. He had a functioning prototype in a factory in Monmouth, Illinois. He had blueprints. He had refinements planned for the next version. He was weeks away from a first commercial demonstration, and then, in the middle of that year, the factory burned to the ground. Everything was gone. The prototype, the spare parts, the tools, and most devastating of all, the blueprints. A decade of drawings, refinements, and adjustments up in smoke. Otto had no insurance that could cover it. Think about where he was standing. He had sold the businesses that fed his family. He'd taken a night job as a security guard. He'd spent 5 years convincing his wife that this bread machine was worth everything. And now, it was ash. Most people at that point quit. Any reasonable person would have quit. Otto didn't quit, but he had to, for a while, because the truth is he couldn't afford to keep going. He got a job selling investment securities to keep his family fed. He put the bread machine away. For years, it sat in the back of his mind. An unfinished dream. A ghost. But he never stopped thinking about it. Every night on the walk home, he was designing improvements in his head. And in those quiet years, he realized something the first prototype couldn't solve. The staleness problem. If sliced bread was going to work commercially, slicing wasn't enough. You had to wrap it, immediately, airtight, right there in the same machine. Slice and wrap, 2 actions, 1 device. Nobody had ever done it because nobody had needed to. Whole loaves don't dry out as fast. By the mid-1920s, Otto had scraped together enough savings to try again. He was in his mid-40s now. His hair was going gray. His health was starting to slip. But he had a new design. In 1927, a full 15 years after he first started, he finished it. A machine that could slice a loaf into perfect, even pieces and then wrap the whole thing in wax paper in one continuous motion. He filed for a patent. He built a working commercial version, and then he faced the hardest problem of all. He had to convince someone, anyone, just one baker in the entire country, to actually use it. Because remember, the industry had been telling him no for 15 years. 15 years of doors closing, he needed one door to open. His one yes came from Chillicothe, Missouri, from a baker named Frank Bench, an old friend of Otto's whose business was already in trouble. Frank owned the Chillicothe Baking Company. Sales had been declining for months. The 1920s were roaring for cities, but small-town bakeries were being squeezed by larger, modern competitors. Frank needed a gimmick, a new product, a reason for customers to walk through his door instead of someone else's. Otto called him up. The conversation, by all accounts, was blunt. Otto said, "Frank, I have a machine. It slices bread. It wraps bread. I need someone to try it. Every other baker in Missouri thinks I'm insane. Will you?" Frank thought about it. Then Frank said yes. The machine was installed in early July of 1928. It was roughly the size of a small piano, chrome-plated, loud. A row of thin blades on a moving frame, followed by a wrapping mechanism that folded wax paper around the sliced loaf with mechanical precision. On July 6, 1928, Frank Bench ran his first ad in the local paper, the Chillicothe Constitution Tribune. The ad announced what he called a new sliced bread service. He gave the credit to Otto by name, and he included one line that would echo through the rest of the century. He called it, quote, "the greatest forward step in the baking industry since bread was wrapped." Remember that line. We're coming back to it. The next morning, the first loaves went on sale. The newspaper article at the time actually admitted in print that the idea of sliced bread may be startling to some people. Even the bakery wasn't sure how customers would react. They found out fast. Customers were skeptical for about 10 seconds. Then they picked one up. Then they bought one. Then they bought another. Within weeks, Frank Bench's bread sales had jumped dramatically. Within a few weeks more, they had increased by around 2,000%, according to figures that circulated in bakery trade publications at the time. 2,000%. Let that number sit for a second. A bakery that had been dying was now selling more bread in a month than it had sold in the previous year. Housewives loved it. Kids loved it. Working husbands packing lunches loved it. Anyone who'd ever wrestled with a bread knife on a Monday morning suddenly understood something obvious. Slicing bread by hand was a chore. And here was a way to skip the chore entirely. But the real magic wasn't just convenience, it was consistency. Every slice was the same thickness. Every slice fit in a toaster. Every slice made a perfect sandwich. Word spread. Fast. Other bakers who'd told Otto no started calling him back. They wanted his machine. All of a sudden, they wanted the thing they'd been laughing at for a decade. The product Frank Bench sold had a name: clean-made sliced bread. It came wrapped in wax paper with a printed label. It looked clean, modern, industrial in the best sense of the word. It looked like the future. Rohwedder set up a company, the Macro Sales and Manufacturing Company, based in Davenport, Iowa. He started building machines as fast as his small team could assemble them. But Otto couldn't build them fast enough. Demand was outrunning supply, and a national competitor was about to enter the game and change everything. That competitor would take sliced bread from a small-town novelty to a household name. It would sell so much bread that within 5 years, an entire ancient industry would flip. It would put sliced bread on so many kitchen tables that when the government came for it in 1943, the country would erupt. We're getting there. But first, October 1929 hit, and Otto Rohwedder nearly lost everything, again. In October of 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression hit like a hammer. Otto had just launched his manufacturing company. He was about to scale up, and suddenly nobody had money to buy anything. He held on as long as he could. He shipped machines when he could. He negotiated deals. He watched the demand curve go from vertical to flat. Around 1930, he had to make a hard decision. His company couldn't survive on its own. He sold the patent rights in his company to Micro Westco Kosher of Bettendorf, Iowa. As part of the deal, they kept him on as vice president and sales manager of what they called the Rohwedder Bakery Machine Division. Otto never became a rich man from the invention that changed the world, but the machine kept spreading. And in that same year, 1930, the national competitor arrived: Wonder Bread. Wonder Bread didn't invent sliced bread. Let's clear that up right now because a lot of people get it wrong. Wonder Bread had been around as a whole loaf since 1921 out of Indianapolis. In 1925, the much larger Continental Baking Company bought the brand and took it national. Then, in 1930, Continental Baking made the leap. They adopted the slicing technology Otto Rohwedder had developed. Wonder Bread became one of the first mainstream national brands sold pre-sliced, and that changed everything. Chillicothe had proven the idea worked in one small town. Wonder Bread proved it worked in every town. Within 3 years, the shift was staggering. In 1933, for the very first time, American bakeries produced more sliced bread than unsliced bread. In just 5 years, an entire ancient industry had flipped. Sliced bread became the default. Whole loaves became the exception. And sliced bread pulled other products up with it. The pop-up toaster, invented years earlier by Charles Streit, had never taken off because hand-cut slices were uneven and jammed the machine. Sliced bread solved that overnight. Toaster sales jumped through the 1930s. Packed lunches got easier. Sandwich making got faster. Peanut butter and jelly on white bread became the American school kid staple. By the end of the 1930s, sliced bread wasn't new anymore. It was just bread. Americans had stopped noticing it. The way you stopped noticing the floor, which meant something dangerous had happened, something the government would soon exploit and immediately regret. An entire country had built its daily routines around a machine most Americans had never heard of, built by an inventor most had never heard of. Take that machine away and see what happens. That's exactly what the United States government was about to do. Because in January of 1943, Americans woke up to a headline that seemed impossible. The United States government had banned sliced bread. Not restricted it, not rationed it. Banned it. The date was January 18, 1943. The order was called Food Distribution Order No. 1. It came directly from Claude R. Wickard, the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, who also ran the newly formed War Food Administration. Under Order No. 1, it became illegal for any bakery in the United States to sell bread that had been pre-sliced by machine. The public reaction was immediate, and it was furious. But why? Why on earth, in the middle of a global war, did the U.S. government care about how bread was being cut? To understand this, you have to understand what wartime America looked like in early 1943. The country had been at war for over a year. Every resource was being counted, measured, and rationed. Sugar, coffee, gasoline, rubber tires, meat, butter, nylon stockings, steel, copper, wool. Housewives kept small booklets full of ration stamps. Every trip to the grocery store meant math. Every meal meant planning. Into that environment, Secretary Wickard's ban landed like a slap in the face. The official reasoning went like this. Sliced bread required heavier wrapping than whole loaves to keep it fresh. That heavier wrapping was made of waxed paper. Wax was a war-critical resource. It was used to weatherproof military equipment, seal ammunition, and protect gear from the elements. The bread slicing machines themselves used alloy steel for the blades. Steel was needed for tanks, ships, and rifles, and officials wanted to hold down flour prices as wheat costs climbed. Reducing bread production complexity, they argued, would help. Wickard made a public statement. He said, essentially, that American housewives wouldn't mind slicing their own bread again if it helped save wax paper and contribute to the war effort. He was wrong. He was very, very wrong. The reaction was one of the most vocal domestic protests of the entire war. By this point, sliced bread had been part of American life for 15 years. An entire generation of children had never known any other kind. Housewives had thrown out their old serrated bread knives years ago. Kitchens weren't set up for hand slicing anymore. Time magazine, in a February 1943 article, described the reaction bluntly. It quoted housewives fumbling with old serrated knives, cursing, cutting themselves, producing what the magazine called lopsided slices, which even the toaster refused. Some women ran to their corner bakeries in a panic just to buy dinner rolls because rolls were still legal. One woman wrote a letter to the New York Times that became famous. She said, quote, "I should like to let you know how important sliced bread is to the morale and saneness of a household." She wasn't joking. Bread was a symbol. Sliced bread was the small daily convenience that made all the other rationing feel bearable. You could give up sugar. You could give up nylon. You could give up gasoline. But taking away the pre-sliced loaf on the counter, that felt personal. Bakeries protested. Housewives protested. Newspapers editorialized against the ban. Congressmen received bags of angry mail. Radio hosts made jokes about it. Politicians received letters from constituents demanding they do something. And here's the thing. The ban wasn't even saving what officials had said it would save. By late February 1943, government reports were coming in showing that the projected savings in wax paper, in steel, in flour just weren't materializing at the scale predicted. The wax paper savings were minimal. The steel savings were basically nothing, because the existing slicing machines had already been built and were still operating. Nobody was manufacturing new ones anyway. Meanwhile, the political cost of the ban was enormous. On March 8, 1943, less than 2 months after imposing it, Secretary Wickard rescinded the ban. His public statement did not apologize. It did not acknowledge the outcry. He simply said, quote, "The savings are not as much as we expected," and moved on. The New York Times ran a small, satisfied note about American housewives who had, quote, "risked thumbs and tempers slicing bread at home," and could finally put their bread knives away again. America had won a small, strange domestic battle in the middle of the biggest war in human history. Sliced bread stayed, and it never left again. Which brings us to the phrase, you've heard it 1,000 times. Somebody buys a new gadget, tries a new app, discovers a new restaurant, and they say it. That's the best thing since sliced bread. Where does it come from? Remember that ad Frank Bench ran in the Chillicothe Constitution Tribune on July 6, 1928, the one that called his new product the greatest forward step in the baking industry since bread was wrapped? That was the seed. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, bakeries across America copied that structure. They'd introduce a new product and compare it to the introduction of sliced bread as the ultimate benchmark of innovation. A 1939 Indiana bakery ad called a new twin-style loaf, quote, "the newest thing since sliced bread." Variations of that phrasing showed up in bakery marketing across the country. By the early 1950s, the phrase had escaped the baking industry entirely. The earliest documented use of the modern version appeared in March of 1951 in a newspaper quote from the American journalist Dorothy Kilgallen, who was writing about the British actor Stuart Granger. Kilgallen's sister was quoted describing him as the greatest thing since sliced bread. The next year, in 1952, the comedian Red Skelton used the phrase in an interview about the new medium of television. He said, quote, "Don't worry about television. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread." From there, the phrase caught fire. Comedians used it. Ad copy used it. Regular people used it around the kitchen table. By the mid-1950s, it was a permanent part of the American language. And from there, it spread around the world, which is genuinely wild when you think about it. Otto Rohwedder spent 15 years and lost his entire savings. He survived a factory fire. He clawed his way through the Great Depression. He gave the world a machine most people had said nobody wanted. And now, almost 100 years later, we use his invention as the literal measuring stick for every other invention, every phone, every app, every gadget, every idea. All of them get compared to the thing he built, but hardly anyone knows his name. Otto Frederick Rohwedder retired in 1951 at the age of 71. He and his wife Carrie moved to Michigan, where their daughter lived. He passed away on November 8, 1960 at age 80. He didn't die famous. He didn't die wealthy. He didn't get a Nobel Prize or a presidential medal. There's no Rohwedder statue in Washington. But one piece of his life did make it to the nation's capital. The very first commercial bread slicer, the one Frank Bench installed in Chillicothe in July of 1928, fell apart after about 6 months of nonstop use. Rohwedder built an improved second version to replace it. That machine still exists. It sits behind glass in the Smithsonian alongside the original Star-Spangled Banner and the Wright brothers' airplane. That's how significant what happened in Chillicothe was. The machine that started it all is treated as a piece of American history. The town of Chillicothe hasn't forgotten either. Every summer it holds a Sliced Bread Day festival. There's a mural downtown. There's a marker at the site of the old bakery. Local historians have spent decades trying to pull Otto Rohwedder's name back into the wider American consciousness. But most of America doesn't think about Otto. Most of America doesn't think about sliced bread at all. It's just there. Every morning. In every kitchen. On every grocery shelf. 14,000 years of whole loaves. One jeweler. 15 years of failure. One fire. One friend in Chillicothe. One newspaper ad. One 2-month government ban that failed so completely it became a joke. And now, a phrase we use so often we've stopped hearing it. Every time you drop a slice in a toaster. Every time you build a sandwich. Every time you say the phrase without thinking about where it came from, you're reaching back through nearly 100 years to a man who was told his idea was pointless and built it anyway. That's the real story of sliced bread.